Gosh, where to begin? We've just got an hour to talk about landscape photography. I think the best way that I can begin, and I've done a little rehearsal, is what are we going to put inside of this frame? The still image is very still. It has no dialogue, it has no music, it doesn't move. And yet, its role is to awaken something in somebody, the viewer. So how is it that the viewer, what is it within the image that the viewer will make either a favourable response or an unfavourable response to it? What is it that we have to incorporate into our landscape image, whatever it may be? It's outside. Well, I think if we treat it on a trial and error basis and we do it on a hit and miss basis in the way that we used to when we had rolls of 36, do you remember we used to press the shutter? And many of us, including me, would say it just after we press the shutter. We might say it to a neighbour, hope that comes out. What does hope that comes out mean? Does it mean technically? Or does it mean that within that image, some of our own emotional response, I don't know what other criteria one can use to measure a photograph. Oh, it's a nice pattern. Looks nice, nice colour. We are using our emotions to respond. We definitely are. And if we're going to make a favourable response, then what does that landscape photographer have to imbue into the image to suggest, at least, that there's something of them in that photograph? There's something of their relationship that they're having at the time of making the image with the landscape. So in a way, we're honouring the landscape. Photography is about noticing, it's about wonder, it's about relishing, it's about contemplation, it's about meditating, it's about thinking of our own existence, it's about thinking about this extraordinary planet that's spinning round. And really, it's a thing, mostly for me, it's a thing about embracing my own sense of amazement within the image. And I think that's what we're all doing. So what word could we use? Well, beauty. What's wrong with beauty? Not really cool these days. I went with my daughter to New York, about 15 years ago, more maybe, because I wanted an exhibition in New York. Bit scary, had a big portfolio, had a fancy suit. My daughter said I looked like a bookie, which is not really very nice of her, but anyway. And we made 20 appointments with 20 galleries in Soho and other parts in Broadway and so on. And most of the galleries, in fact almost all of the galleries except one, we went into, and they looked at my big portfolio and they said, oh my God, this is beautiful work. Oh my God, this is amazing. Pause. But we can show you. Oh, why? Well, it's just beautiful images. And here comes the killer thing. It's decorative, 1. It's literal, 2. It's representational, 3. And I'll never forget my close friend, Joe, saying to me, eye candy. Well, okay, if you want to write it off like that, but what are 2.5 million people doing when they come to the Lake District? Are they coming just to say, yeah, we've been to the Lake District? No, they're not. Why do people climb? Why do people stop their car and just say, oh, look at that photographer or not photographer? What is it that arrests people? It's beauty. It's a response to beauty. The camera is the most wonderful conduit to be able to secure and to harness that beauty, but we have to do it wholeheartedly. We have to do it not on a hit and miss, as I said earlier, on a casual, you never know, it might come out basis. We have to completely explore, analyze, investigate, interpret, respond. Being a photographer is not quite an artist. What does artist mean? I think it's a responder and an interpreter. And we're there alone, more often than not. We're our stage director, we're our lighting director, we're our choreographer, we're all of these things mixed up. And ultimately, we're waiting for the final signal to press that little humble noise, isn't it? A little funny pick as you press the shutter. And at that moment, an immense thing happens. All of that response that we have made to our landscape comes rushing through the camera and is secured onto what used to be film, but now the memory card. Then something extraordinary happens. I think we all can identify with this. In the old days, many of us will remember trannies. It's always a private experience, wasn't it? You got it from the Royal Mail Special D, and it arrived, and you ripped open the packet. You didn't want anyone else to be there. Out came your trannies, your sheet of 12, or whatever it was in my case, or in Joe's case, a few sheets of 5, 4, 10, 8. And out it comes, and you look at it. And you look at it quickly. You need to know, is it there? Is what there? Is some of the gravitas, some of the pathos, some of our human emotional response that we invested, that we received, that wonderful exchange between landscape and us and landscape and us, is it there? Or is it soulless and sterile? Well, sometimes, many of us will know, we just go, it's not there. And it doesn't matter a hang how many people say, oh, but it's beautiful. We know. It's not there. It didn't work. The great Ansel Adams, forgive me, I'm a bit old school, but I'm all right about that. The great Ansel Adams, who wrote, let's face it, the camera, the negative, the print, they're worth reading. They stand up today as much as they ever did. I do urge you to just reinvestigate him. He's not passé. He's not yesterday's man. He's as today as he always was. And one of the loveliest things that was said about him was that he was able to transform geographical reality into transcendent emotional experience. What a completely lovely thing. And what he would say was, if I can remember, recognition and pre-visualization blended together in one single moment of awareness. So if you sort of break that down and unravel it, which we're going to talk about in a minute, his head turned, he recognized, he pre-visualized, and he then produced the most perfect, divinely perfect, not contaminated by anything, no aberrations, absolutely sublimely perfect image in here. Then he had to get the camera, whatever it was, 10-8, 5-4, and a little foray with Hasselblad and colour, which I think he would probably be quite happy to kind of put to one side. But there he was, trying to produce an image that had parity with what he's already done. I mean, he could almost just walk away and not do it, but he can't do that. He's a landscape photographer, so he's got to do the image. He's got to make it happen. So he stands there and he sets up 45 seconds, a minute. He was a very fast worker sometimes. And he then had this extraordinary wrestle between trying to produce an image with the feet of clay, if you like, and the exposure and the mechanics and the technical, which he did with his eyes closed virtually. And then he needed to produce an image that ultimately would have parity with his pre-visualization. And he was a great, his histogram, the histogram comes from him pretty much, exposed for the shadows, developed for the highlights. He could compress and contract a subject brightness range like nobody could. Absolutely sublime. And no, he didn't do endless burning and dodging. He reinterpreted some of his images, yes, at a later date. But really, he was an extraordinary man. He engaged with the landscape in such a pure, beautiful way. And that's what we're all trying to do. In this room, we're all trying to do that. So our role really is to celebrate beauty. It's that simple. And I think the more we can drive that back, drive people to understand that it isn't literal, or eye candy. It's actually something that we make a huge emotional response to. It's all we've got. It is all we've got. There isn't anything else, And why is it that we all want to go out and all the time go out and out and out and outside and do things and engage and be part of it? And I think we're probably all photographers. The rainbow is a classic thing. You see a rainbow, everybody goes, oh, look at that rainbow. They're immediately responding to beauty. Oh, isn't that beautiful? I have to own it. I have to secure it. So quickly on for a moment. 5 days ago, I took a ride in the state-of-the-art, top-of-the-range Tesla motor car. I have to remember exactly what it's capable of because I don't understand most of it. 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. Quite extraordinary. And the driver, very nice friend, said, put your head against the seat rest because I'm going to show you what this can do. Oh, marvellous. And he did. And I was thrown back like in a rocket. So I'm going to just read out this. I wrote it earlier. 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. 6 radar thingies. 80 megapixels. It's funny. 4-wheel drive, 20-inch info screen, focus stacking. That's odd. How do they come together? But we never looked out of the window. So the analogy is, I know we have digital, we live with digital. Photoshop is absolutely marvelous, or Lightroom, or whatever image manipulation software we have. It's fantastic. It's liberated photographers to do all sorts of things. But the key, surely the key, is to do so with restraint, to do it with integrity. Because the moment, you can always tell, the moment you have an exhibition, you can always tell photographers, and we all are photographers, and I do this. There's the image on the screen, on the wall, and here come a pair of photographers, all of us, and it goes straight in like that. They go straight in like that, and here come the usual suspects: pixelation, oversaturation, oversharpening, and bad HDR. And you see them stand back. Other people just look at the photograph. Other people just look at the photograph, but not us. We have to go in there. So bad HDR, you know, I do see bad HDR sometimes. It's rather alarming, because I think to myself, hold on a minute, the lighting ratios are skewed. That's messing with God's light. A shadow is a shadow. I can almost hear the shadow saying, but I'm a shadow. Don't fill me up with light. So there are various things that I think that digital has brought with us. Many pros, but a few cons. For example, it's made us reckless. I'm not saying that when we had our images, you know, our roll of 120 and we had only 12 images left, and oh gosh, here I am wherever I am and I've got hardly any film left. Oh gosh, I better become a bit more discerning because I haven't got many films left. Of course that's not it. But it is making us a little bit reckless. And I would love to one day run a workshop where we've just got a 40 megapixel card, or whatever it is. Nowadays it would have to be a little bit more. So let us think, as Mark so brilliantly said, let us just pare away all of this technical, all of this, the bits and pieces that perhaps are intruding in some way into our pure relationship that we're having with the landscape. We have to read the landscape, we have to relish it, we have to drink it in. And then we have to start doing the process of saying, well, I am going to make a photograph of it. Right, well, I better be aware of all that I'm incorporating and omitting the redundant bits. So I better have a really good think about it. I better look at the sky. Rather important, isn't it? I mean, what painter would just say, oh gosh, I thought I'd finished, but I've forgotten the sky. Silly me. Let's think about the beauty of clouds and the structure of clouds. Let's think about the clouds that actually aren't in your photograph. In fact, the ones that aren't in your photograph are often more useful than the ones that are. Because you can orchestrate, and I'm sure all of you know, we all know you can orchestrate your lighting. You are the lighting director after all, the unsung hero in the theatre. Poor lighting director never gets a single thing said about him. Costume designer, director, actors, set designer, and all the rest of it, writer, playwright. But the little lighting director, right underneath, you might just see him lighting by. And yet they can bring immense pathos into a production. So let's not forget all of those incredibly important elements. Let's look round the edges of our photograph. I mean, it's so easy to be preoccupied with the central bit. Let's not just look globally, let's just relish all the little elements, all the aspects, all the integral part, all the components that will come together and interlock so sweetly that then when we see the image at the end of the day, we never say to ourselves, and how shameful this is, we never say to ourselves, and I do, I'm afraid, oh, I didn't notice that. Years ago, we'll look at some pictures in a minute, the advanced driving test, somebody told me, it's a bit fanciful, but I think it's possibly true. The advanced driving test, the examiner puts his or her hand over the driving mirror and says, what's the colour of the car behind? How many people in it? Male or female driving? And give me 1 or 2 letters of the registration plate. Many of us might say, well, I didn't know there was a car behind. So we have to think to ourselves when we're looking at the landscape, let's receive every wonderful bit of it. Let's just relish every little bit of it and just use as much of our process of examination that we can possibly muster to be able to say, Yeah, that's a unit now, and yeah, no, no, it's not going to work. And if you feel that sense of insecurity, walk away. Making a silk purse out of a sow's ear is often really not the answer. The key really, and tragically, when one has hope for a silk purse, you often look at the result, as we said a little bit earlier, and we see a result that actually doesn't awaken anything in us. Finally, before we look at images, I have made friends for the last 10 years with a very distinguished neurosurgeon, brain surgeon. And I asked him, how long do you think does it take for an individual who sees a landscape photograph, for the first time to make a response, favourable or unfavourable? And Henry said, well, let's not forget the eye and the brain are an extraordinary double act, and maybe a second. Really? Yeah. So can we break that down, Henry? How does that work? Well, he maintained that you scan, you process, you interpret, you build associations that may go right the way back to images that your parents might have put in your bedroom when you were 5 years old. All sorts of things will take place in your multi-terabyte, zillion terabyte brain, and you'll start delivering, ultimately formulating a response that within a second will result in something like, oh, I love that. Oh, that's beautiful. That's so beautiful. Funny, that word beautiful. It appears rather a lot, doesn't it, in photographic speak? And so it should, because that's what we're doing. We're just simply celebrating beauty. So rather than go on and on and on, I think we'll start with a few photographs. I think I've got this right, yes. I meet quite a few people who say to me, I love black and white. Oh yeah, I do too, I reply. I love black and white too. And they say, and this is really wonderful, this, it's much more arty, isn't it? Yes, I suppose it is. What do you mean by that? Well, it's just more arty. Yes, I suppose it is. But I'm not quite sure what you mean by arty. Well, I don't know. It's just. I mean, we don't see in black and white, do we? And it's just got. I don't know. It's just. I don't know. It's just more artistic, right? So colour not. No colours not arty? Well, no, arty, colour is arty, of course it is. Well, so it is interesting how black and white, which we all love, I don't know a single landscape photographer who says they don't like black and white. For heaven's sake, we're open to everything. We're celebrating photography, we're celebrating the human response to our world around us, and that's what the still camera does. How many still photographers have really messed with that little red button to make moving film? Hardly any of us. We don't even know how to edit it. We're totally hooked on the still image. If I said one word to you, how quickly does it take you to come up with an image? Napalm. Yes, that little naked girl. Everyone knows it. And I could mention many, many others. So I'm going to talk very quickly now. We're going to go quite speedily through the various ways in which I've been influenced and why I have been. I love looking at photographs. I love landscape photographers and landscape photography because I know that we're all talking the same language. We all feel and respond in exactly the same way as one another. That's why we all get on so well. So, Margaret Bork Waite in 1904, not bad, pretty contemporary, pushed open a door and saw some Steinway pianos just being fixed. And I immediately thought, gosh, that's so graceful. Gosh, that's so rhythmical. Oh, that's so lovely. Edward Weston going through his vegetable period. He flipped a cabbage leaf onto the other side and suddenly saw not a cabbage leaf anymore. Oh, for heaven's sake, no. It's nothing to do with it being a cabbage. It's something to do with something graceful and beautiful and sort of sinuous and reminiscent of maybe a riverbed. Who knows what it might be reminiscent of? But he suddenly introduced to us something that was absolutely remarkable, a beautiful thing. His pepper. I mean, heavens above. 40 odd of them he did, I think, something like that. And how brilliant of him to decide to not put it on a flat surface, but to embrace it with a concave surface, wrapping it up. It's become a voluptuous thing. Absolutely breathtakingly beautiful. Nothing to do with it being a red pepper. Just a marvellous, beautiful thing that happens to be something that he responded to. Can you imagine the pleasure he got with producing this? And forgive me, Edward, Mr. Weston, sorry, for the burnt out highlights. They wouldn't have existed. Oh no, they definitely wouldn't. I had a job in Libya a while ago, and it was quite an interesting experience, and I won't go into it in depth, but I never did quite find out exactly who commissioned me, but one or two people suggested who it might be. And I really enjoyed it. I was there 3.5 months, and I'd love to say that I came back, you know, under a machine gun fire, jumping across rooftops, trying to get home. But actually, I came back on a perfectly ordinary scheduled British Airways flight. But on the 17th of February, and it pretty much kicked off, I think, in Benghazi. But that's pretty well going away from the point I wanted to make. There's a certain word that I like to use called refinement. And I think the more we engage, and I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, the more we engage with what we intend to make a photograph of, the better. I have a little phrase, sorry, I've got a few of them, attend and intend. Attend to everything, and let everything attended to be either intended or not intended or accepted to be there. That's, I think, a really important thing. Attend to everything. And I played a little joke, a little game, because I was really interested in this process of responding. What is it, and I repeat, what is it in the viewer that responds favourably? What is it that you've invested within your photograph that encourages a favourable response from the viewer when they see it? They've never been to the country, they don't know anything about it, they've never been to Glencoe or Scotland, wherever it is, Wales, doesn't matter, but what is it that you've got right that they then just say, oh, that's beautiful. So I decided to play this little game, and I thought refinement. So the first thing I did was I managed to, I'm not very good with Photoshop, I managed to produce a photograph where that pricked the skyline. I've got this little phobia, I'm in treatment for it, I might say, where, you know, verticals bisecting horizontals, and it is a silly thing. It's actually a silly thing, it doesn't really stand up, but I've just got a thing about it. So, but I showed that to my wife, this image, and one where I just pricked the skyline. And it was fascinating. I've now done it about 20 times. And I laid two prints side by side, and I said, sweetie, these photos, I've only ever done it once, she finds it deeply boring. These photographs are in every respect completely and utterly identical. I promise you, they are absolutely identical. But which one do you prefer? Well, her response, because she's quite short-tempered, is, well, for God's sake, I either like both or I hate both. But nevertheless, she just said, oh God, I've got, you know, I can hear her now saying, I've got better things to do. That one. And I've done this nearly 20 times, and 100% of the time, it's been the one where there has been just that little tiny bit of extra refinement. So don't underestimate the eye and the brain in conjunction as being unbelievably discerning. So don't just palm off the viewer with something that you were, you know, not able to notice. We talked about that, to say, when we look at our finished result, oh, I never really saw that. What's really bad and what's really worrying is when somebody says, oh, I love the way you've done that. And you think, oh, I'm not sure I ever really was fully aware of that. So it's very, very easy to not fully invest all of yourself into your production, because I think that's really what a photograph is. It's a production. It's multidimensional. There are so many things that are taking place within it. Fitting, not fitting, conflicting. It's just the most wonderful construction process. Lovely process. Never mind this kind of quasi-religious experience that you're going through, which we are. I have a friend, a doctor friend, who no need to tell you his name, but he's a completely lovely man who had a period of deep depression. And he went to went for some treatment, and the therapist said, where are you at your most happiest? He said, I'm at my most happiest when I'm standing behind my tripod with a camera on it, waiting for things to happen to my liking. I thought, what an absolutely beautiful way of describing where he gets a sense of calm and peace and joy. Going to go a bit faster now. I have to say thank you to my friend Joe Cornish for saying, yeah, you'll love Namibia, Charlie. Take a panoramic camera. And bless him, he's sitting here now. And I did exactly that. So thank you, Joe. And I love Namibia, and I wasn't going to go. And interestingly, my sister, who's quite, how can I put it, quite critical, constructively critical, said, Charlie, it's lovely. All this lovely grace and rhythm and all of these lovely, you know, hemispheres and little crests and little diagonals and triangles and all sorts of things. But she said, Charlie, darling, I'm awfully sorry. The sky is completely wrong. What? What do you mean the sky is wrong? And she said, well, it's too chaotic. You've got this lovely, graceful, you know, rhythmical shapes underneath, and the sky is too chaotic. And I think she's right. So, but I didn't know what value to put. I mean, I've gone back on 3 or 4 times now. Blue sky, you know, maybe a dark sky, red filter, all that stuff. Make it slightly more punchy, but have a you know, a mid-tone. Make this a zone 5 or whatever it is. And ultimately, I've never really succeeded. So it's quite interesting when somebody introduces something that suddenly my confidence, in a way, goes, and I'm sort of reevaluate it. So it's a fascinating process, response to the image. I have a Photoshop friend, I'm going to speed up a little bit, who's much better at it than I am, much, much better. And I showed him this image in Timbuktu, as one does, go to Timbuktu every other day. And he said, I said, you know, I'm really fed up because the bum end of this camel 1 is concealing the head and neck of camel 2. And he said, oh, for God's sake, Charlie, give me 5 minutes, I'll sort it. I'll separate them for you. So he did, and it was marvellous. But I couldn't sleep at night. It just didn't, you know, it was haunting me. And it's a bit like Ansel Adams. We go quickly back to one of the things, that extension, which I perhaps didn't complete, where he produces an image in those 30 seconds that didn't have parity with his pre-visualization. And why? Because he was forced to tolerate compromises that he didn't want to have to tolerate. But he did it nevertheless. And we do it nevertheless. And we have, I remember I've talked to many of my friends, we have category B, C, D, E's and F's. We really do. 12 a year and you're doing well. 12 a year and you're doing well is what he said. 12 a year that met his stratospherically high standards that he set himself, which are so elusive. They keep getting higher and you keep climbing up to try and get to them, to try and produce something which to you seems absolutely perfect. Thankfully, we never will. There's always some little tiny thing. I remember reading somewhere there was a little specular highlight just off a leaf that he didn't actually really want there. And a wind got up suddenly. Or there was a ruffle on the water, you know, that he didn't want to have, that wasn't there when he first came. So the reflection in some way was broken. So compromises are the worst. They're like a terrible thing to have to tolerate. With any creative endeavor, we want to reduce the number of compromises that we're forced to make so that the image that we produce ultimately does satisfy us. And we do feel that we did fully embrace that our own emotional response that we made and our sense of wonder and relishing within the still image. So anyway, the finished result was very impressive for him. Very impressed. I was very impressed by seeing this brilliantly skillful way he separated 2 camels. This is an extraordinary experience for me because I cannot do things quickly. And I had no idea that the net would be in some way acting like an ND, neutral density uniform ND filter. I had no idea that it would suddenly reveal high cirrus, you know, lovely, 6 miles high and made mostly of ice, I gather, my Met friend says. I had absolutely no idea. And I didn't know that when the image finally appeared, when I made a print, that the knot would be exactly above his hand. I didn't know that that would be reminiscent of a bit of cirrus. So it's really fascinating to when you're sort of sailing blind. I'm completely out of control. So I could never be a sports photographer. How brilliant they are. I could never be a wedding photographer. How brilliant they are to deal with things that are constantly moving. The Amish people. I felt I was invading their territory. And this man knew I was. But what was it that told me the final signal, and we all know this, that little moment where you think, now, you just get it, don't you? Just think, now. It's lovely. Then knowing digital as we do, we think, oh, I'll do another one. Nothing's really changed at all, actually. Nothing. But I'll do another one. Still nothing's changed, but I'll just do another one. And that's why we're all buying bloody external 5 terabyte hard drives. full of unedited stuff. You know, it's so easy, isn't it, to eventually to end up with images that in the old days, you know, we'd have just done perhaps one or two. And Joe and I remembers, in fact, Joe very sweetly introduced me to Getty, which was another marvellous, generous thing that he did. And interestingly enough, in those days, I think we did brothers or sisters, and we gave them, you know, 5 or 6 trannies, and off they went around the world. So the Amish people, 30,000 of them in Pennsylvania. I had an American friend who was a bit dismissive of them, and he said, Charlie, I'm going to get up in the middle of the night, I'm going to get some white paint, and I'm going to put www.amish.com on one of their buggies, knowing how they reject 21st century. We're going to move on quickly. Staircases, absolutely love staircases, and we're talking about influences. So I've been influenced certainly by many wonderful photographers who've done marvellous photographs. This isn't a landscape, but isn't it a beauty? Elliot Erwitt, the great Elliot Erwitt. Felix, Gladys and Rover, but which is which? Absolutely lovely image. And he, you know, they were ready to go, weren't they? They had a Contax or a Leica preset, aperture preset, shutter speed preset, turn, nail it. Fantastic response rate, absolutely marvellous. And I had a go, and I'm not going to get anything like the titter that the great Elliot Erwitt got with his. I'm on a ferry in the Isle of Wight. So we're talking about influences. We are influenced by everything. By other photographers' work, by music, by movies that we see, by advertising, by it doesn't matter what it is, we're constantly being influenced, and in it goes, it's all sitting there, and then perhaps it re-emerges when we're stimulated in some way. That refinement. This wasn't a setup, but even if it was, we might talk a little bit about choreography shortly. But interestingly, you know, whether we choreograph or photograph or whether we don't. And it is quite a manipulative business, really, I think, in a way, when it comes to involving people. So here's a little tiny refinement you might have noticed. And it's a small thing, but it mattered to me. I suddenly thought, no, I can't have that. So I put literally that little black slight slit in her gown, and I rather wished I hadn't done that. I'm not entirely comfortable, and I'm not for one moment. I'm not suggesting that digital, you know, manipulating an image is a crime. Of course it isn't. It's an electronic darkroom. It's wonderful, and I just keep saying, as long as we don't go too far. Because the viewer of the image, and this is really important to say this, the viewer of the image must trust it. They must trust it. If there's a sense of distrust, they'll break the viewer, the relationship between viewer and image will be broken, and it can never be restored. You know, when you've lost a little bit of weight, the person who's commenting might put their head to one side and they might raise their voice a bit like, you lost weight. It's quite complimentary, and you say, yes, I have actually. It's exactly like that if you've gone a little bit over with your saturation, which, you know, in Arizona we often see, and Joe knows this well enough, and many of us do. You go to some of those marvellous slot canyons, and you'd think they're red enough, wouldn't you? Do you really need to go, oh yeah, what the hell? And everyone says, God, was it really that red? Was the sky really that blue? You know, so when you're with a polarizer, beware, sensitive. Look through it first, you know, and decide if it's all blue or gosh, you know. So try and just restrain yourself from crossing the line in any of those Photoshop areas, so that you deliver an image to somebody that they never for a moment distrust or have misgivings about. They just stand back and just say, oh, that's absolutely beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. I love doing these things. I chased 2 nuns in Siena for fun. But a friend of mine came up with such a good observation. He said, supposing the arrow was pointing in the other direction. How clever of him. Quickly moving on. We're going to speed up a little bit. To choreograph or not to choreograph. And I think the key, if people, I'm just going to check my timing, that's fine. The key is with this sort of process, if you like, if you've got people in your landscape, which is fairly rare for me, is to decide whether you do want to say, could you go left a bit, up a bit, right a bit? No, could you just get a little bit closer? There's something about then seeing the finished result where you feel, yes, you did engineer it, but there's something rather lovely about the landscape photographer coming across something that is gifted to them, or at least they can see the potential, and then really, and I keep saying this, fully engaging with all that it has to offer you. It's just the most wonderful thing, and we all know that, and all our speakers today, I'm sure, will come from the same standpoint. So this one was not choreographed, and a part of me feels better, but I don't really know why. It just feels better than that. Moving on. The Great Kurtesh. Let's unravel a photograph, let's unwrap a photograph and ask ourselves, why? You know, when we're looking at postcards, I never forget arriving at a place, San Gimignano, and I had a cup of coffee, I was waiting for someone, I was there for about an hour, amazing treat. And opposite me was a cafe with lots of postcards available. And I watched the people entering San Gimignano, coming up the hill, and stopping at the first postcard rack. And I also watched people who'd already experienced the town coming down. Really fascinating. I'd already identified a photograph that I thought was marvellous, and I just thought, oh, that's so well, brilliantly done. And it completely told me what this marvellous town was about, San Gimignano. And every so often, I noticed the owner of the shop, probably 3 times while I was there, coming out and replenishing that pile, that particular slot where that particular postcard was. And everyone chose it. They spun it around. I thought, yeah, I wonder which one you'll choose. They stopped at that particular one and pause, and yes, out it comes into the shop to buy it. I wish I could remember his name, but I remember getting in touch with him and telling him about the card, and he said, I wished I hadn't given them exclusive rights and the ownership of the copyright in those days. And he said I would have paid off my mortgage just with that one image. So let's look at the unraveling process. Why do I love this so much? Well, I love it because I love the hat. Yes, we all do, but it's a nice little arc on the hat, then the nice little arc of the vase and its accompanying shadow not being clipped by the edge of the frame, and then the big player, this marvellous balustrade, which is really the big black statement, and then another little arc there, and then throughout this image, to contrast with the arcs, are littered right angles and rectangles. So absolutely beautifully crafted photograph. And that's what we're doing. We're crafting something. We're like an excellent woodworker. We're like a person who's composing a piece of music. The photograph isn't just a photograph. It's right up there with great symphonies and great paintings and great poems and great novels and great movies. The still image is as crucial to our lives as it ever was when it first started. And we must try and stop saying, and I have to quickly say thank you to PhotoSpeed for being part of this marvellous event. We have to stop doing this. It's like a nervous tick. Oh, where is it? Oh no, sorry, it must be that way. And the viewer's thinking, oh gosh, you know, I can't really get it. I can't really get it. I've got a little expression going off piste a little moment. The print is the photograph's rightful inheritance. Joe Cornish a long time ago started up his gallery, and he really trailblazed photography in many ways. I have to salute you, Joe, for that. He prints. We must all print more, and I'm not just saying this because PhotoSpeed are in the room. We must print more, because otherwise we're going to have a whole load of these 5 terabyte external hard drives full of stuff, and we're never going to get it out. And the full engagement of a photograph, the best way to receive all those lovely nuances and subtleties that we've invested into our photograph is to see it in print form. So come on, everybody. Let's take a leaf out of Tim's book and Joe's book and many photographers. Let's exhibit. Let's work with charities. If we don't have to make money from the prints, then even better. You're liberated from thinking, oh God, how much can I get? You know, be prepared to run it at a bit of a loss. But share our landscape photography, and bottom line, or should I say top line, share beauty. Share beauty. And that's really the key. So well done, Kurtesh. And well done, Cartier-Bresson. Sifnos, 1964. Why do I love this so much? The smallest element of the photograph is playing the most major role. The most major role. Where does our eye go? To flora. And it's sad, really, that in another part of the world, there's a part of the photographic fraternity that likes to distrust and likes to say, well, you know, he did that. You know, but Cartier-Bresson got her to run up and down lots and lots of times. Well, I know now that it's not true. Because when I went to Sifnos some years ago, guess who I met as I was waiting? Unbelievable. I was standing there with my small group paying homage, you know, almost kneeling down. And all of a sudden, a lady and her child came down. And incredibly, I thought, well, I'll just ask her, if perhaps for fun, we could ask her child just to be there. And she said, well, yes, of course. Yes, of course. I'm Flora's daughter, and that's my granddaughter. Oh, you mean your mum was that little child? Yes, yes. Oh, my word, what a... You know, we all started being rather overwhelmed. But let's look at why, if we unravel it, what is it about this construction? It's a wonderful thing Cartier-Bresson did. You know, I'm pretty familiar with his work, not all of it. He's remembered probably for 20 images. There you are, 12 a year and you're doing well, but 20 really strong images. You know, composers are perhaps remembered for 20 great symphonies, poets and so on. But what is it that makes this so compelling? Well, for me, it's her elbow. I don't know why, but it just is. Because that elbow sets the scene for the right angles, 28 of them. Sorry, it's a bit sad, isn't it? I've counted them. I know, I'm in therapy for that as well. And it's just such a beautiful orchestration of shapes and diagonals and triangles and rectangles. And imagine if her knee had bumped into that wall there, into that shadow. It would have been very different. Colour. Poor old colour. What were they saying in those New York galleries? Colour. Well, I think colour, black and white, were producing an image that we hope will return to us our response in a single still image. That's all we're asking. So what was this all about? In the lot in, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I think. It was about me feeling really depressed. I had a really bad 2-day period of feeling rather depressed. Just check my time. Yeah. And I felt, right, that's rather appealing. Does that kind of in some way embody my rather low feeling of myself, my low self-esteem? So could it be that my morale, which was fairly low on that particular day, it was Christmas Day actually, could it be that I gravitated toward the lonely shed? Because effectively we are all lonely. We're alone. And, you know, we engage like we're doing now, and it's just fantastic. But essentially, we are alone. And we're battling through our lives, dealing with all the things that we've got to deal with. We won't linger too long on that. But it could well be that the feeling that we're experiencing on a particular day has a bearing on what we might photograph. This is all conjecture. You know, no one can prove it. But I like the sort of the lonely feel. Blossom. Why do I respond to blossom? Lots of people love blossom. We all love blossom. We love a lovely blossom tree. It's a miraculous, magical thing. So what do we want to do? We want to produce a photograph that does have parity with what our human response is to blossom. We do. We do. We just think, oh gosh, that's beautiful. I want to make a photograph of it. And that's why still photographers, landscape photographers, that's why we all are so like-minded people. I'm sorry, I'm getting all passionate, but that's really what we're all talking about. So why wouldn't I suddenly think, oh my Lord, look at the Sierra Nevada in Andalusia and this lovely line of blossom. Oh gosh, that's absolutely beautiful. I must honor it. I must get my camera and produce a photograph, and I repeat and repeat and repeat, that will have parity with my sense of complete and utter wonder. The avenue of trees. You know, we all love a good avenue, or some maybe not. But I do remember being here, and it was quite a funny little story. Some of you may know it. Looking back, it was fun, and also rather sort of in a way it just showed how sometimes I can get quite nervous. And I set up here, low colour temperature. Well, it would be autumn, sun low, warm light, amber absolutely everywhere. No need to pump up anything, exactly as it was. Set up for, oh, this is lovely, what a graceful, it's reminiscent of the nave of a cathedral and so on. And I thought, oh, lovely, right, no one here. And then I had a fut of a little de Chauveau car. And out came a man, look, spoke French, obviously, my French is awful, but he spoke excellent English. And he said, "You are photographing my trees." And I said, "Oh dear, I'm so sorry, I didn't realise that. I didn't know that they were your trees." He said, No, they are not my trees. But he said, "I've been passing these trees every day for 20 years on my way to work, and I always say to myself, one day I must make a photograph of these trees, and now a bloody Englishman is photographing my trees." And it was quite just amusing. Anyway, I gave him a Polaroid in those days. Here am I'm going to send myself up, which is really necessary to do. Here am I saying, attend and intend, all that, which I do believe, but it's a bit of a lofty, fanciful thing, isn't it? So I did. I thought I was attending and intending here. And then I showed it to somebody, a small group of people. And I think it was a brigadier in the back of the auditorium suddenly said, "Damn fine bottle of Chardonnay there in the background." And I'd never noticed it. So, to hell with intend and attend and all that stuff. I'd never seen it. I was too preoccupied with making sure the trees aren't masking each other, trying to get symmetry, because, symmetry, asymmetry, even by a millimetre, means the eye will immediately detect it, doesn't it? Walk into a room, picture not quite level with the architrave, just a quarter of a centimetre out. For some people, do you mind if I just make that? It's driving me mad. I just want to be able to change that. So the avenue of trees. Henry Marsh came down with a friend, and that friend was a very distinguished man who had done for 10 years an enormous amount of research, visiting 1,400 hospitals in the US. He'd gone to the US and he'd been employed to do so, to write a thesis, to come up with, if you like, an overview of whether the artwork in hospitals was appropriate to more favourable health outcomes. And he visited lots and lots and lots of hospitals, as I say, over 1,000. And as a consequence, he then wrote all about his experiences. And Henry Marsh, this marvellous man who I'm slightly terrified of because he's so, I nearly said so brainy, it's not right for a brain surgeon, but he's just a completely magnetic personality, and he'd poo-poo all that. But he came down with this marvellous researcher, Roger, and they spent a day with me, going through my photographs to choose some to go into the hospital, King George's, St George's in Tooting, and which Henry calls St Beasley's. Because he feels it's not conducive. The common areas in the hospital are not in any way conducive to encouraging people to feel better, give themselves less pain relief and so on, and just generally up their morale and produce less, instill less fear. It was pretty nasty. And he wanted, knowing that you might be operated on your brain, it doesn't bear thinking about it. So he wanted some photographs, landscape photographs, not paintings, are not abstract. Not multiple exposures, which we're not going to go into, because I think they're marvellous when they're right and awful when they're wrong. But in my judgment, not anything other than just a straightforward, many people might say rather literal, decorative, eye candy, but images that uplift people, which our landscape photographs hopefully will do. So he chose, and my God, he dismissed more than he chose. No to this one. Henry, I rather like this one in the Somme. No, Charlie, lovely, but imprisonment. That one, I'll have that one. Well, fairly obvious, light at the end of the tunnel. But there he wanted images that made people feel better. So no, not even for a moment. And he probably chose, I think, about 12 and dismissed maybe 100. Avenues. Attend and intend, another sending up of myself, really important to do that. Showed it to somebody, said, marvellous, they said. That's absolutely lovely, I love that. It's going uphill, like the keys on a piano. Good grief, I never saw that. Smack wrist, Charlie. Never noticed that, never thought that it was going uphill. So it's really important, I think, to be prepared to, be sort of very humble. And when somebody says they love a photograph, it's pretty nice, isn't it, when people say that? Then it's always slightly unsettling when they, as I said a little bit earlier, when they see something that one didn't see oneself. The Somme area, past these trees, thought, oh, that's lovely, cold and warm together. That's a guarantee. I don't want to say it's about being formulaic, but nevertheless, if you were to walk down the street in canary yellow and cornflower blue trousers or skirt, there's a very strong chance that eyes would turn because, you know, complementary colours. Wow, frisson between the two and the others as well. So blue and cold and warm. But there was something wrong, and I realised what it was. But only when I came back, I realized that it needed these little belts. It needed this separation from reality to reflection, or reflection to reality, and it needed just that. And I was really glad, just a couple of inches. Made a big difference. Top light. Most landscape photographers, we all say, no, top light. I want a raking side light. I remember for once, I encroached into Joe's territory in Yorkshire, and I measured the the shadow from a wall at midday. Well, there was hardly any. There was hardly any shadow, if anything, on a dry stone wall. But I passed by later on in the day when the light was going down at mid-June, and the shadow had gone to something like, Joe will be familiar with this enough, something like 100 feet or more. I mean, just phenomenal. But top light, not popular. But top light was necessary here, because these little shadows, when I passed by, came back later, they were bumping into each other. And so that coherence was suddenly missing. So do investigate shadows. Shadows play as great a role in any photograph as any other part of the photograph. You know, shadows have got to either got to make themselves clear, or they've got to be dealt with, or they've got to be understood, and the way they contribute to the main overview of the image is absolutely pivotal. For some reason, this photograph is incredibly popular. I like it, but for some reason, it does sort of transport people to a place that they like to be in, to perhaps another dimension. And, you know, landscape photographs, one loves it. We all love it when we sell a photograph, or when anybody just says they love it. We've already discussed that. But for some reason, this is really popular. And it's nothing that I feel, oh yes, well done, Charlie, you produced an image that's really popular. It was, I hate to say it, it was serendipity. I much prefer intentionality than serendipity, but we all know that sometimes serendipity, and I often think it's my mum saying, I'll get the cows to be in his picture. Because when I first arrived, they weren't there. They were here. And I hung around for a bit thinking, oh gosh, there's not very nice weather. Oh gosh, and suddenly they started slowly ambling along, and they deposited themselves right in front of me. But some of them have got 6 legs, unfortunately, and some are a bit lumpy. But this one, I remember him well, decided to come and investigate me. I've never really pleaded with the cow, pretty much. I don't think I ever have. But I did find myself saying, go back, please go back, just go back. And amazingly, it did. Went back to this spot, and it seemed to work quite well. And a sudden marvellous little bit of light made it gleam, that water, and I'm sure many of us know that. Moving on a bit quicker. The lonely tree, the lonely tree. Who can resist a lonely tree? You see its nobility, its stateliness. You find suddenly it's expressing itself. It's not got any others to compete with it. Mark does marvellous images where they're a collection of, and many of us do, but Mark's in particular lovely, where there's a marvellous collection, mosaic of different trees, all expressing themselves. I find being in a forest difficult. I can't get a sense of order. So the lonely tree, the cypress tree in Tuscany, the tree in, that many of you may know this, in Buttermere. And what I really love about the lonely tree, and we all love them, don't we, was that in this case it was lovely to be able to orchestrate the lighting. A little bit of a ladder, sometimes I like to use, just get me up a couple of feet, no really, huge thing, don't need a drone or anything, marvellous though they are, not anti-drones, although perhaps the audio is a little bit infuriating. And I was very glad that I had a bit of height, because I could stop that encroaching into the diagonal slope. I managed then to do what landscape photographs do tend to need, and many of us do it really well, terribly well, which is to introduce a sense of depth, to mitigate the two-dimensional nature of landscape photography. Little bit of depth really does help, and that can be done usually with lighting, or can be done with orchestrating the shapes and the design of the image, so that people feel, yep, this is nearer than that to me. And then a bit of good fortune is that the slope of that is pretty much in keeping with the slope of that. So when you unravel a photograph, It's a really enjoyable thing to do, and I urge you to do this. Ask yourself, why do I love this? Instead of just saying it's lovely, let's look at the composition. And that's really what we're doing. And many people find composition elusive, and I'm one of them. Sometimes I think, I'm really feeling this, but I can't get it, I can't grapple with it. And I went on a workshop some time ago where, only 6 minutes left, where I was with a group, and which is always enjoyable, and an American photographer, a dermatologist. I remember him now saying, Charlie, how do I get all of that into this? I can't do it. I can't do it. So he turned and photographed a dandelion. But when we saw the finished result, everyone said, oh my gosh, whose was that? And it was the divine dandelion. Little retort stands, mirrors, reflectors, a little bit of silver paper, and produced a photograph of a dandelion. It wasn't a dandelion anymore. It was a thing of beauty. Absolute beauty. And everyone just went, oh my word. And he turned to me and he said, Charlie, I could manage that. You see, I could manage that. I couldn't handle it. It was too cumbersome, too overwhelming. Going to go fast. Oh, I could have cursed the farmer for not making these lines right so that they could exited the corners of the frame in the way that I would have liked. And yes, a number of people have said, oh, come on, Charlie, couldn't you have just moved the camera a little bit? I tried, I really did try, and to maintain the tree where it was. Anyway, it always reminds me of what a lovely time I had there. Quite perverse, I think, in a landscape that is essentially about the horizontal, to do a skyscraper, as some people call them. But the Orient, that's very common, isn't it? I'm not very familiar with Oriental art, and I'm sure many of you will have an understanding greater than mine. But I did think it was rather odd, and yet when you stack it up, it seems to work quite well. Monte Orvieto up there, which Joe and I know very well, and many of you do, I'm sure. The clump. Many of you will know the clump. I remember being there in the early 80s and thinking how lovely it was. And then it was such bad weather, and suddenly I remember I was sheltering under a bit of black polythene, and the black polythene started getting warmer, and I thought, my gosh, the sun's coming out. And it was. And suddenly it slammed onto the foreground landscape. And suddenly it was thrilling. And one day, I remember talking to Joe, we both hate the word impact, or, a drama, because they don't seem to be fitting really, those sort of terms to use for a landscape. But it really was absolutely thrilling. I can certainly use that term. Lake Titicaca, Mum, I'm sure, was there organising things for me. I found this, I had a 617 camera, always odd. Everybody asked me, why not 618? Well, Paula from Linhof Studios down in Essex will say, well, of course, because you couldn't get 4 on a roll of 120, so it had to be 617. So 617, wonderful thing, only 4, maybe 8 if you've got 220. So I had it set up, and then I thought, oh, I've got no height. And I realized that I had to get this. This was there. This was there because it was quite close. And I saw the little tiny school, and I ran into the school and I said, is there any chance I could have you anything I could stand on? And 4 children came with the teacher with a desk, and I stood on the desk and they were holding it, and I had the blessed camera, and it was just a completely lovely moment. And then I realized, oh, I've got nothing. I've got nothing else. You can't have a roll of, you can't have a panoramic which is sort of uneventful, just one item. Well, you sort of could, I suppose, but it needed support. And then my mother brilliantly, enter boat, blue sail, same colour as Lake Titicaca, enter stage left. Fantastic. Thank you, Mum. Oh, and by the way, dribbling along, no wind until finally it cleared the reeds, got to there. Suddenly, I'll give Charlie some wind. Perfect. Wind comes up, triangle, 2 triangles, another triangle, reflection. God bless my mother. Absolutely marvellous. I know it's her. I'm absolutely convinced. Tuscany. Everyone will know Tuscany. Well, I say everyone will know it. Not necessarily been there, but it's still lovely, even though very many more photographers now go there. And they will have done before I went. When I went in the 80s, and when Joe and I went, there weren't so many people, but it can still be relished. You have to have rain the night before. When you fly in to Pisa and you drive down to San Curico or that sort of area, it's got to be raining, because hopefully then you'll have your mist. I'm going to speed up a little bit. There are times when you just think, I haven't really embraced Tuscany as I really would love to. I can't produce a photograph that really encapsulates my feeling that this is like stepping into a Renaissance painting. And by the way, when a lot of people, I know one person, when somebody says, I love your photograph, it's just like a painting. It's, you know, and he says, oh, it's not a painting, it's a photograph. I think it's being a bit pernickety. If somebody says it's just like a painting, that's pretty nice, isn't it? Or some people might say of a painting, it's just like a photograph. So we must get over ourselves and not be too, you know, precious. All we want to do is to produce a landscape photograph that has parity with what we feel and that expresses our sense of wonder, which I keep repeating. Namibia. Thank you, Joe, again. I'm talking about you a lot, Joe, aren't I? Really marvellous. Went to there and had a guide from Yorkshire, interestingly. She'd been a guide in Africa for about 20, 25 years. And I said, can you take me to the most beautiful place in all of Africa? And she said, yes, I'll take you to the most beautiful place in Namibia. And I know all of Africa, pretty much. But this, for me, is one of the loveliest places. And we drove in the dark. And when we got there, when the dawn came up, this marvellous knife-edge shadow there lasted such a short time. And the relationship between that little thing there and the sky, and it was completely and utterly wonderful. And just to relish and be part of. And I asked her, what's the distance from there to there? She said, 12 miles. Phenomenal. We're going to go really fast now. Trees in the Dordogne, who can resist lovely buttercups and trees with the same colour just on their early spring leaves coming up. The ladder's quite handy because in a way I was glad I had it, and it was only small, as I say, 2 feet up, but it allowed me to separate the top of those reeds from there. So that, just a little bit of elevation, but sometimes there I am revealing more than concealing. Sometimes we want to conceal more than reveal. And sometimes we want to go right, left, up a bit. Do explore. It's so easy just to say, oh, that's lovely. I've got a phase, I've got a Nikon D850, I've got my Hasselblad or whatever it is. That's lovely. I just pointed at it. I wish it was like that. I sometimes think I wish cameras had a little tiny voice in it, said, Charlie, this is a masterpiece, do it. But regrettably, it doesn't. We have to make that decision. And we have to engage ourselves, but let's really immerse ourselves as deeply as we can possibly get into the whole landscape photograph image making process. Mont Saint-Victoire. Why did he apparently go back to Mont Saint-Victoire, Cézanne, over 40 times and paint it? Just check my time. Oh, going to have to really speed up. He did it because he perhaps felt he hadn't quite got it. A little Pyrenees scene that my mother, again, was accompanying me on a book, and she said, don't worry, it'll stop raining. We'll go around the next corner, we'll find something. And she was right. I'm rather fond of this. I don't quite know why. Perhaps because I can hear the splintering of the rock. Who knows? Dolomites. Moving on, the big view, Cadair Idris near Barmouth. Must finish on time. Palouse. A good place to go, the Palouse. I'm sure many of you will know it in Washington State. Wiggly things, round things. Near me, Wynn Green. Sort of amphitheatre feel. Rather nice to, as I say earlier, maintain, look at the clouds, orchestrate them and get friendly with the clouds. They're so helpful. Please, come on. Just subdue that back area to pronounce the amphitheatre feel. And clouds are so friendly if you really, make friends with them. Nearly there. Another view, an amphitheatre feel. And our British landscape is completely marvellous if we can just get over the hedges and treat ourselves to a day a week if we can. And I need to tell myself this, just to get out, perhaps without a map, explore lanes and little roads that you've never been to that might just be down the road from you. Part of the Dolomites in northern Italy, extraordinary phenomena. Very, very strange place indeed. Nearly there. Sodalite Rock in Spiegelblitz in Namibia. Nice, rather pleasing relationship between sky and the rock. Bougainvillea petals on a swimming pool. A little bit of wind just helped to make it a little bit more interesting. Reeds in the Hebrides. Rather nice relationship, I thought, between the cold and the warm. Winter's coming. Do photograph in the winter. It's a wonder. We don't always has to be snow. Do just get out in the winter, even if the weather forecast says it's changeable. That's such a good time to go because they don't really know what's going to happen. So really enjoyable. Reeds, oh gosh, I wished I'd had more cirrus clouds filling that space, but sadly not. In the Camargue, hails of bay, I nearly said, bales of hay. Thankfully a ladder just to separate the belly of the cloud intersecting with the top of that bale, which I was thankful for. China, very difficult for me, completely out of my comfort zone, didn't really know what to do, so I had a go. Little comic scene in Lincolnshire, quite fun. I like this because I like the integration of it. I like all the shapes, and it was just really good to have spent a day there, just drinking it in, and this sort of gully here. I enjoy that one, perhaps because it's really quite recent. Doormats near me in Cranbourne Chase. We're speeding up because we've got to finish really in the next minute. Do go out, as I said, if it's changeable. Gosh, I could curse the farmer. Why didn't he? Oh, that's rather interesting. Another one of those. Why didn't the farmer extend that hedge? That's so thoughtless and inconsiderate. It's a bit like airline pilots. Why on earth can't they just not do those streaky white bits which masquerade as high cirrus? We've seen that. Oilseed rape and flax, and the farmer said, "You profited from my error." He said, I'm the laughing stock of the Wiltshire farming community because I planted the oilseed rape too late and it's come up next to the flax and I didn't know what to do there. So he said, "You'll never see it again." Back to the Palouse, coming to the end. This was before the great 10 stoppers that is very popular at the moment, that I find rather interesting. Perhaps sometimes it makes it look a little bit over-engineered. Venice, an impossibly difficult place to photograph, but do go. I really found it difficult. Little gate. No, there was no sun. But when suddenly the sun appeared, it made all the difference, and it lasted probably about 15 seconds. So if you've established the shapes and the design and all the component parts that seem to fit so well, but you just want a little bit of that, that great conduit. Don't always have to have it, but you want hard light, then just have a little peep and wait. And if there's no pressure, just hopefully it'll happen. More shapes and relationships, and the cold and the warm seem to work quite well in Tenerife, and in Libya. I remember thinking something's wrong, and I opened the door, and then something suddenly was right, and I managed to make the the shadows interlock and exit in the right place. Quite a popular little place now that was hidden away in those days, called Lucignano. Just rather pleasing and soft, gentle little image. This isn't my work, I just photographed somebody else's magnificent work. Magnificent. That's all I was doing. It's a record photograph of something else that was absolutely beautifully done. In Myanmar, waiting for this lady, waiting for her to get into the right position. I must say, I remember thinking, brush it this way, brush it that way. That was her hearth to her house. And finally she got herself in the right position. Cadiz, endless sort of thinking, well, it needs animating, and then a very friendly seagull came along to see his chum, or her chum, and luckily it was at the right altitude and delivered its little shadow in the right place. I'm having a little foray with some rather strange images, rather strange landscapes, but I'm enjoying really a lot. I'm slightly out of my comfort zone, but I'm enjoying exploring, and they work sort of quite well together, really, as a sort of a trio. Sometimes textures, another bit of a departure for me. It's not a landscape, Charlie, it's just textures. Lonely boat in China, spending a lot of time thinking, oh gosh, where am I going to put it? And then I thought, I'll just try and get it to talk to that tree in some way. And it did seem to work quite well. Somebody said this would work quite well as a cover to an opera. A catalogue for an opera. Do look at water and look at the cold and the warm and look at relationships of colour. Sometimes I find it elusive. Landscape photography is hard, isn't it? It's quite a struggle. It's not always, oh yes, easy peasy. It's like the great Kennedy, we're going to the moon, not because it's easy, because it's hard. And I think we like that struggle, and it's important that insecurity should accompany, a degree of insecurity should accompany any artistic endeavour. My 3 doggies. And a ridiculous sky that just by chance, so glad I took a little camera with me. The last 5 now, a little departure going to the back of a church in Greece. Libya, Tripoli, a mausoleum. Staircases, that's exactly the colour of it, and I really enjoyed it, hugely enjoyed it, just the relationships. A little humorous, why not? Why not? You can't resist it sometimes. We all use our phones and everything else. And my doggie, and that was exactly the colour, Staffordshire Bull Terrier, who I'm completely in love with, and who's called Tank, because he is reminiscent of a tank. And my daughter's dog, Mabel, and just love photographing doggies. And finally, a long time ago, the Jura in France. And I think this encapsulates what we're all here for, is that the landscape does stimulate us unbelievably, doesn't it? Unbelievably. We have to own it. We have to own it wholeheartedly, repeating myself again. And the manifestation of that beautiful, beautiful exchange, that beautiful relationship that we have with beauty is to be found within the print or the image that we made of it. And I think that's really, bottom line, what it is. So that when we produce a photograph, it does have parity with what we felt. And we are able, by looking at that photograph, it evokes the experience that we had at the time and hopefully informs and illuminates and awakens the people who look at it. Thank you very much.
Charlie, great to see you. We've really enjoyed, what a fantastic talk, and I said earlier, tour de force of photography, but your energy and enthusiasm and passion, it made a great kick-off for the conference, so thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, for such complimentary remarks.
I think that one thing I particularly wanted to say was it was such a joy for me to see new work and old work together, because I mean many of those images that you showed us are favourites, icons of colour photography from the 80s and 90s, but you're also showing us much of your new work now. And yeah, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I would. I think one of the things I realise that most of us are doing is what I call having a go. We're trying to stretch ourselves creatively, and I think if we do respond to something that hitherto we haven't responded to, or even noticed perhaps, then we might as well try and interpret it as best we can. So I'm feeling appropriately a little insecure about that new work, but there's a little voice in me that says it's okay, but I haven't. It's a bit like moving to a new house. I'm not entirely fully comfortable in it, but I'm hoping I will become so. And I'm responding more. I'm beginning to respond more to some architectural features in buildings and so on that give me a lot of pleasure aesthetically.
Well, I think that I look back at your work over the years. I'm lucky enough to have known your work for 40 years now, and I've always been inspired by it. But you have a unique eye for form and for space, and in many ways, though, architecture is a natural area for you to explore because of that. You have it clearly. You look at your landscapes, and many of them have a kind of orderly quality. You respond to the grace of ordered elements in the landscape, and I feel that that's the special atmosphere that you're able to see, which is also a lighting attribute. Is it just seems to be to do with a lot of it to do with form and space, and hence I think why you're so comfortable with those kinds of elements.
I certainly am, and I wonder where that desire to if you like, capitalize on, spatial relationships and order comes from. It could be as simple as being a very untidy person. I mean, it may well be that I yearn to be tidy and better organized. In fact, my office is a complete tip. And I'm really, really an untidy person. Nothing is in the right place. My desktop is in a complete jumble. But when I'm out in the landscape, I absolutely have to have precision, arrangements, design. Everything has got to be completely and utterly right. Well, the same could be said of your work, obviously, but you and I can identify with that need to orchestrate our photograph so that it is tight and it does absolutely reek of just order and precision and design, so that it when we see the finished result, we feel satisfied. But at home, I simply can't do that.
That's a real interesting insight. I was very taken by the kind of, there were many subcurrent themes in your talk, but the one that particularly resonated for me was the idea of beauty, and that photography, as landscape photographers, predominantly the pursuit of beauty, or the search for beauty, is something that is continuous, ongoing, and universal, and it's a universal desire for probably, well, it feels for most landscape photographers. And I think back to the work of photographers whose work might appear to be about things of pain and suffering, but often the element of beauty is still there. I think of Simon Norfolk, whose work you might know. Yes. And his photographs are magnificent, and there are often of war-torn landscapes, let's say, but the way he sees still encapsulates beauty. And to me, that concept, which you kept coming back to, was just, it is ever present and vital. Love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, it really is. And in a way, I think it's our lifeblood. And I think there are many people, we just met somebody a moment ago who said, I'm not a photographer. And I think I replied, but yes, you are. You just don't make photographs. So I think our response to beauty is really multifaceted. And when it comes to responding, I'm really, really keen to try and ensure that our response is delivered back to ourselves in a manner in which we can then feel that it's how can I put it well? It is almost a perfect parallel between our human response, our emotional response, and a finished result. And it's so easy for it to fall short of that expectation, and it can do so easily. I'm sad that beauty is not trend. It's not a trend. I'm very, very sad that photography is perhaps not seen as it should be. I think it's better than it was, but in the US we both know that it is, but perhaps not in the way that we might like. I'm longing for beauty in photography to be more greatly acknowledged. And I'd love to see more galleries in Regent Street and Oxford Street and, central, right in the heart of cities, where we share what we've produced amongst the people. And so I think it's really important to try and do that, because we will be better for it.
Definitely, and I think it's a favourite topic of mine is the sort of urban critics' view of the world, which often seems to exclude the idea of beauty. But you use the term that we discussed in the past of eye candy. The reason that I use that term, if I can bring you back to that, was that somebody once described my work as eye candy.
It did.
And it's I've never forgotten it, because I found it was so depressing.
Yes.
that was their view. And I also feel that, it was a good thing for me in a way, because it made me think more deeply about whether something is about decoration or about something deeper than that. And that's certainly important. I think that the essence for me of beauty comes from nature, and so that's where I constantly return to discover it. And it's great to see your work, because there's this much more how can I put it, human interaction in your photographs, and you find charm and vitality in those human landscapes as well, which is great to see. One more thing I wanted to say, because I think this is so crucial, is you talked about a parity of experience. Translating the experience from the eye and the brain into the photograph is the key, isn't it? And that's an ongoing mystery.
Ongoing mystery. You put it really well. Just recently I read a lovely line from John Keats, poet, where he said he wants to take a greater part in the existence of things. And I think photography doesn't do, as many people like to suggest it does, separate you from the experience. It actually engages you so profoundly into the relationship between you and nature and man's effect on the landscape, and it is really, really, really important, I think for more people to photograph. I do, because I think it's a wonderful therapy. It makes you, perhaps, I really do believe it makes you see in a more profound and deeper way. It certainly doesn't separate you from the experience.
Well, in fact, I'd say the opposite. I think it's about to connect, create connection, and because when we go out with our cameras, we're deliberately looking to see, and if that makes sense,
It does.
and really that process is, as you say, it's immensely therapeutic. I often think that as workshop leaders, that's one of our main roles, is to encourage people to simply connect, to connect with the world around them, and to experience the value of our relationship with nature, and to try to restore that relationship, which is so deeply broken by our political and social systems.
It is. And technology has got in the way. You're right. We're all wandering around looking at our iPhones, bumping into people. Yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly, Joe.
Although the iPhone is actually a very good camera.
I know. Isn't it just? It is.
Yeah.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you for our little chat.
Well, it's great to talk. Great to see you. And Charlie, thank you so much again for an absolutely magnificent and inspirational beginning to the conference.
Oh, bless you. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.